Hey, everybody. I'm looking out my window at a little bit of a snow squall here on Thursday, December 4th, as I record episode 220 something, 223, 224. I don't know. I'm in a really, really, really rough space. And so this is going to be a real time podcast episode because I believe this will air in less than a week. Normally, I record well ahead of that. So by the time you hear something, I talked about it maybe a month ago. But I've been in a bit of a downward spiral emotionally, and I think it's a lot of things. I have a very hectic, busy household. I have a lot of people that rely on me. I have a hard time saying no, so I put other people's needs before mine, and I just get frustrated. I also can often get indignant and feel like I have a chip on my shoulder because I do 9,000 things a day. I am often surrounded by people who do a lot of sitting and do 9 things a day. So I have to balance myself between expecting people to keep up with my pace and understanding that this is my reality. My firm belief is that the universe brings us to the people and the places that we need to see and be. The only time I have trouble with universal guidance and no coincidences, blah, 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 is around Molly's death, because I just feel like I don't want to accept that anything around that was supposed to happen, even though in my better moments I do. So it's December. This year is almost over. And when I compare a year ago from now to now, I don't feel like I've made a lot of progress in many ways. I feel like I've just completed a circle, that I'm not thinner or healthier than I was a year ago. I'm not necessarily drinking less than I was a year ago. My house is not any cleaner than it was a year ago. All of the projects that Kenny and I committed to doing that I cannot do by myself, let me be clear, are undone. My house is a mess. My life feels very cluttered and chaotic. School board is miserable right now. And Karen Kenny's voice comes to my head a lot. KK, you get back what you put out. And so I'm putting out a lot of frustration and resentment and anger. So yesterday was December 3rd, and 40 years ago yesterday at Concord High School in Concord, New Hampshire, a school shooting occurred. Now, this was 1985. So there was no internet, there were no cell phones, there was no instant news, there was no social media, there was none of these things. Shootings happening in schools didn't happen. I vividly remember friends of mine that when we got our licenses and drove to school, lots of people up here in New Hampshire hunt, and kids would have their hunting rifles on the back of their trucks. And they'd drive to school, and there they were. And you think about that now. I mean, gun violence has quintupled since then, but you're not allowed to carry your guns anywhere. I don't know. It's just really weird. So, long story short, a young boy named Louis Cartier Jr., was your classic bullied kid in the late 70s and early 80s. He hated school his whole life. Looking back on it and really talking to some of the people that knew him, was horrible. He was bullied and tormented for his clothing and what he looked like. And he didn't always know how to advocate for himself either. So, in all of the articles that cover this horrifying school shooting, I'll include a link in the bio to the stories about this, or just Google school shooting Concord, New Hampshire, 1985. The way that we sort of talked about kids and students back then is a bit alarming. But we did. A teacher was quoted in the article by saying, "Well, he wasn't really attractive." Okay, well, that's a judgment that I wouldn't want anyone making about my child. How about say people bullied him for his looks? You know, that doesn't have you make a statement about somebody's looks. I read through the articles and all these familiar names came up, and my brother and sister were both in high school at that time. And that school shooting was 6 weeks ahead of Krista McAuliffe dying in the Challenger explosion. And she was a teacher at Concord High School. I think back to that year and I think back to those things happening. The grief of it weighs heavy on me. I feel bad for Louis's life and the torment that he lived with, and that he thought it was okay to get drunk on a school day morning and walk into the school he had dropped out of 2 weeks prior with a shotgun and look for people. It was an altercation that took place in the downstairs hallway. It involved 2 students that he took sort of hostage, told them not to move or he'd shoot them. Football coach came walking up the hall and said, "Look, hold me hostage. Let them go. Hold me hostage." He raised the gun at the football coach. The football coach went down a side hallway to get out of the way. There were police there, one officer face to face with him, gun drawn, another officer behind a glass, like a glass wall, sort of, or a door. Just several feet away on either side of this hallway was a classroom and the main office. So you have secretaries and and administrative staff on one side, and you have a classroom full of kids on the other. And that particular classroom also had glass walls. You could look right out into the hallway. What a horrifying way to feel. Long story short, Louis wouldn't put his gun down. He started to get agitated. One of the kids he took hostage said, look, I'll drive you anywhere you want to go. Don't let me go get my car. Louis let him go. The other kid was still there. It agitated and escalated, and he ended up getting shot and killed. One gunshot spilled his ammunition all over the floor. He looked a bit surprised. He came up with his gun, and then he was shot by another officer. Of course, it was examined and investigated and everything else, and the police actions were considered justified. And, you're in a school full of kids, and this was brand new. Nobody knew what to do here. What strikes me, though, in thinking back on this is the overwhelming grief of his parents, his mother, who, by all accounts, was never the same. How are you the same? I'll never be the same. But I didn't lose my daughter in a way that painted her as a villain. I did lose my daughter in a way that painted me as a villain and painted doctors as villains. So I can understand some of the publicity around it, but I didn't lose my daughter to a policeman's bullet. And I can't imagine what that must feel like for Louis's mother, or felt like. In reading the comments on the Facebook page, it's a Concord, New Hampshire Facebook page, around this day, those students that were in Concord High School then, 40 years, that's a long time. Freshmen were, 14 then. So 54 to 58 years old is how old those adults are now. And all of them remember exactly where they were and what they thought and what they were told and what they think. One of the students involved, his name is Pat, has unbelievably strong feelings about it to this day. And he's the one that posted the articles. And in the months and years that followed, he really researched all that had gone down and read the police reports. And, it really, really was a turning point, not a good one in his life. And it decimated him. And so in commenting on the article, we began talking. And so now we've become friends on Facebook. So he's been watching some of my Facebook lives. And if any of you watch them, I'm really struggling. I'm just on the struggle bus. I'm angry. I'm hurt. I'm baffled. And the things that have me angry and hurt and baffled are things that have created these emotions in me my whole life. And so again, I come back and back and back to, doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. I wish I had a clear idea on what to change. Do I just change my thought process? I've tried that a gazillion times, a gazillion ways to Sunday. Right now, in all the stages of grief, I'm just fucking angry. That's just all there is to it. I'm angry. In my coping with anger, my new friend Pat, so I speak a lot about Alcoholics Anonymous and just sobriety programs and recovery programs. And I quote from them quite a bit. So he just watched one of my Facebook posts when I was giving people permission to be angry at whatever was bothering them. You go ahead and do it, be angry. He responded to it. And I'm going to read what he wrote because it's wonderful. In my program of recovery, we learn that when we are disturbed, we need to look within ourselves and ask ourselves some very basic questions. And it all begins with one word, and that word is halt. H-A-L-T, halt. Hungry, am I hungry? Angry, am I angry? Lonely, am I lonely? Tired, am I tired? If I am one of these things, it gives me direction to point myself in at the disturbance and why I lack the ability to accept my current circumstances and how that affects my attitude today. So why is my anger getting in the way of me just accepting the fact that these things happen and now it's going to make me angry? In recovery, especially for people that really, really, truly struggle with picking up a drink, it's all about not picking up the drink. Am I one of the things mentioned? And if I am, I start there. If my disturbance continues, I get on the phone with one of the people in my program and tell them what's going on. Group therapy has been the bright spot of my life, as I know I can help others as they can help me. And that is what keeps me sober and happy today. So this brings me back to a conversation with Carolina about not having ideas for a podcast, and I feel uninspired. And her thoughts were that by replaying old podcasts, I was just reprocessing things I'd already processed. I wasn't continuing the journey of processing. And that got me thinking, because I went looking for podcasts I'd already done on anger in the hopes of thinking, oh, maybe I'll just rebroadcast an angry podcast. But I'm still angry. I had a lot of anger right after Jack was born, and that I think I attribute a lot to postpartum depression and postpartum anger. I was a mess. A lot of it was because of Roy, and just his ridiculous behavior. But Carolina mentioned to me that my podcast is a processing mechanism for me, that I talk about things to process. So, in relation to Pat's comment, it's my group therapy. In a Facebook Live the other day, I'm wearing a pink shirt if you want to go look for it. I talk about the movie Ordinary People. I loved that movie. It was made from a book also called Ordinary People. And it chronicled a family who lost a child in a drowning accident. Two brothers went out in a boat. A big storm came and capsized the boat, and the stronger, older, state champion swimmer of a brother died. And the younger brother didn't. He lived. And he felt guilty, and so he tried to end his life. So the story picks up after his suicide attempt and after he has spent a chunk of time in a mental hospital. Now, this is the late 70s, early 80s, so things are different then. The movie is fantastic, and one of my favorite scenes is when the therapist, Judd Hirsch, is trying to explain to Timothy Hutton's character that be angry. For heaven's sakes, let the anger out. Just get angry. Who are you mad at? Who are you mad at? And he prods him and prods him as a therapist. And Timothy ends up having a massive anger outburst. It's such a profound scene because then it ends with him sobbing, and it's really a turning point for him. And so I mentioned that in my live, and my new friend Pat here knew the movie, knew the scene, owns the movie. Like, it was such a connection for us. It was pretty profound. But it made me realize that in my spilling the tea, it's my continuation of processing things that still bother me. And the universe being what it is, my recent experience as a school board member, which I can't share in any meaningful way because it was in a non-public session. But suffice it to say, I felt very discouraged and hurt when it was over, and completely misunderstood and not listened to, and very ganged up on. And I have felt that way before. We had a public meeting several years ago when our current president first took that position. And the first meeting, she took me off every committee that I wanted to be on, and I wasn't in charge of any committees. And her logic and reasoning was that I wasn't a trustworthy board member because I didn't agree with the board. They were taken aback by my disagreement. So I made them uncomfortable, which means groups of board members got together and talked about me. That's not a healthy school board. I have reason to believe a lot of that continues to happen. I realize that I have a lot of unfinished processing around my Concord job loss and the reality of the school board and things that people get away with. And in my desire for justice and fairness, the anger comes when I feel unjustly treated. And I am one of those people that I often feel gets the short end of the stick. And maybe I'm supposed to. Maybe that's my journey in life. You know, things like I was the first girl to break 5 minutes in the mile in height in the state of New Hampshire, but I'm not in the NHIAA Hall of Fame. I was Boston University's first female Division I All-American in track and field. I'm not in their Hall of Fame. I should be. If a Hall of Fame is truly on merit and what you did to earn it, there are people in both Halls of Fame that are equal to or less than me, and they're in there. So I always feel like it comes back to a popularity thing. This is a little bit whiny, I know, but I feel like Janice E. and Mean Girls. That's who I am. I did a really funky email. If you're not on my email mailing list, please sign up for it. I don't sell anything on it. And my podcast editor, Jace, is helping me get more creative with those emails. And oh my God, hilarious. Hilarious. I would never have written it, but now I'm going to really strive to write them just like that one was written. I included a blog that was number one in a series about my job loss in Concord. And I really called people out. However, I was still tightly involved in the community. My daughters were still in school. So I wasn't as open as I would be now. And I talked quite a bit about school board and my precarious balance with filing suit against the district and the NEA, and then being a school board member. So it's sort of like suing myself. And an outburst from one of the school board members in our non-public the other night, she really blasted me, reminded me of a similar conversation I had with a former board president, Cass Ardinger, years and years ago. So I have things to revisit. So my next few blog posts will be links to the original article that I wrote on the Patch website. They will be rewritten and much more open and honest. And they will be a couple of podcast episodes as well. Many of the people involved in my forced resignation and job loss no longer live in this area, or they have retired and moved on to other things. So I feel very comfortable naming them and talking about them because I named most of the people in the article anyway. But I also will exercise caution in people that are still close. If they deserve anonymity, I will give them fake names. Life isn't linear. You come back to things again and again and again. And every time you come back to something, you've lived a period of time where you've learned new skills and moved along a little bit. And so I firmly believe that even though I feel like I'm revisiting the same things, I'm revisiting them from a different place. Hopefully that means I'm making progress. The last bit I want to sort of talk about today before I send you on a little journey, a little scavenger hunt of Barbness, is a good friend of mine, Paul Brogan, recently passed away. So Paul Brogan grew up in Concord, lived his whole life in Concord. He spent some time in California, but really most of his life here. Massively into the Concord Theater and making sure it got restored and maintained and taken care of. He was friends with Doris Day, just this fantastic human being. And when I became a relatively public figure from my job loss and everything, it piqued his interest and he reached out and asked me if I would like to tell my story on his radio show. So WKXL is a little local AM radio station here in Concord. It was 2014. I went on in June and then again in July. I was going to use those radio shows as actual podcast episodes, but there was no camera. I couldn't have played them on YouTube. It wouldn't have maintained consistency in the podcast. So I'm going to send you to them momentarily. But it was the first time I really spoke publicly about my job loss. And it was about 3 years. 2011 was the first year I wasn't teaching. I was 2 years into, or 2.5 years into my school board life. It was in my first term. And so I was far enough away from the events that I spoke relatively honestly. And I remember him saying that was his biggest radio show ever in terms of the number of listeners, because so many teachers listened. The next one wasn't quite as big, but that makes sense. It was summer, not everyone's around. I want you to go to the show notes when you're done listening, and I want you to click on the interviews. 2 reasons. Paul Brogan is someone everyone should listen to. He is just the most amazing human being. In the era of 2025 being the year of entire families dying, Kathleen and her husband both died this year. A year ago, both Mr. and Mrs. Murphy were alive. And a year ago, Paul and his sister and his mother were all alive. And now all 3 of them have passed. So it's one of those like sort of face punches where you can't believe a year ago, all these people were here and now they're not. Paul recently passed away and his mother passed away about a week later. She was 102. Paul was in his 70s. I don't know how old his sister was. When you listen, I want you to keep in mind that this was 2014, 11 years ago. So I was 51. I was relatively new into CrossFit. My life was very different. I had pulled things together and I was doing okay, not knowing I only had 2 years left with Molly. So take a listen. They're both about 45 minutes long. They're worth it. Either sign up for my emails or go onto the website, 1,000 Tiny Steps, and read the blog posts, read the reposted posts and my updated versions, because I'm going to spill the tea. I'm going to really spill a lot of the tea around what happened to me and how I feel like I've come full circle and I'm in the very same situation again with the same people. Something that was said to me in the meeting, and the person that said this has said this to me more than once about when I feel strongly about something. Oh, well, you feel that way because you have a traumatic experience connected to it. So it's a trauma response, which I find insulting and belittling and demeaning and condescending, because what that person is saying is, oh, your opinion has no validity. It's just a trauma response. Poor you in your fucked up life, right? And the second thing it does is it takes complete responsibility off of what my opinion is about. That's where I'm at. That's where I'm at. Oh no, here she comes. I really need to write my autobiography. Write about all the times I felt I was on the outside looking in. I will say, when you're on the outside, you're not confined by walls and fences. So maybe being on the outside looking in is a good place to be. I'm angry and resentful and frustrated and tired and hungry. Well, I'm seldom hungry. I eat well. I'm not hungry. I'm hungry for happiness, but I'm not hungry for food. I'm angry. And ultimately, what's going to happen is I'm actually angry at myself and I'm trying to find a way to project it. I get it. I know. So I'll work on that. Lonely. I am lonely. I have a wonderful friend group from 7th grade math, and I have continued connections with people I've known my whole life. I don't get invited to a lot of things that other people might. I've had a lot of transition in my life. I've moved around a lot. I've had a crazy life, and sometimes people don't want to hang around people like me, and I get it. And if I were happier in my house, that might not be so hard. But I'm not happy in my house, and so maybe that's the place I have to start. And tired. I'm not physically tired. I'm emotionally tired. It's a lot of work being alive, as Barb Higgins. Please do me 3 favors, 3 Christmas presents for Barb. Read the upcoming blog posts. Sign up for my new email newsletter. It's just a newsletter. I don't sell anything ever. And listen to the radio shows. I also reached out to our local TV station because this same gentleman, Paul Brogan, started a TV show, Capital Area Chats, and I've been in a handful of them. Give those a watch. If you sign up for my email, I'll tell you all about what to do in the emails. You just go on the website, 1000tinysteps.com, and you can sign up. If you have words of wisdom for me on how you deal with anger, I would love to hear it. I'm in a gratitude bust right now, so don't tell me to list 10 things I'm grateful for. I have hundreds of things I'm grateful for all over the place. I see them all the time. Sometimes the gratitude doesn't negate the anger, but I'm willing to try anything, almost anything. I hope that you'll be willing to reach out and look at, research and read about Louis Cartier. He deserves to be remembered. I think what happened to him was unfortunate. Be good to yourself, then be good to someone else. And as always, have a good day, everybody. Hey, thanks for listening and supporting the podcast. Feel free to leave a review and share my stories with your friends. Please reach out with your own stories, as I love connecting with my listeners. If you would like to get to know Molly, head over to mollybfoundation.org to see what she is all about. If you want to see what I'm up to next, you can find me on Instagram at Barb_444, on Facebook as Barb Higgins, and at my website, 1000tinysteps.com. And while you're there, sign up for my newsletter, a weekly way to find out what's up in the life of Barb Higgins.